Out. Obviously you're ready and prepared. Thank you very much indeed. Order. Welcome you to our session on the work of the department. Very pleased to see you here, and sorry you weren't with us before Christmas, but we appreciate you were ill at the time, and we're pleased to see you here back fully recovered, I hope.
I am in the rudest of rude health, but could I say, Mr. Betts, it was extremely understanding of you, and I've very much appreciated your personal wishes, and also individual members of the committee also very kind enough to send me a Christmas card or two on this, and yes, I'm much better, thank you. Okay, and we just for one awful moment thought that if you weren't back in full health, we might have your slightly more restrictive American cousin appearing before us this afternoon, which I don't know whether the answer would have been better or not, but only time will tell. Right. On to the questions. What we're doing this afternoon is to ask questions that have been tweeted in by a whole range of people, 1,600 altogether. We have been slightly selective in that one or two of them were probably not fit for our session this afternoon, and we have edited one or two out, and no doubt, Secretary of State, you'll be an expert soon at editing in other forms of council newspapers, but we won't get into that discussion immediately. Well, I did have a look at the hashtag, and I have to say there were some questions I actually blushed.
They must have been bad then, Secretary of State, in that case. First of all, we had a tweet in to say, do you agree with Michael Heseltine's call, which said, I want powerful councillors and want them to be paid properly?
I don't want councillors to be paid. I want them to be recompensed. I always think it's really important for us to be able to have some councillors may want to do it full time, some may want to do it part time. I think the great thing about councillors is you don't have to take a test, and you don't have to come from a particular background. And I think it's good to have a mixture, and certainly I'm sure you recall your time as a councillor, I recall mine. I had a mixture of people, some who could devote quite a bit of time, and some who couldn't. And I think the real secret of being a good leader is to bring the best out of those that have a limited time, so they feel fulfilled. And I think it would be kind of sad if we become, when I say we, if the council become a kind of a new political elite, kind of divorced from the folks who sent us there. So with all due respect, I really don't want to see councils become professional. I have no objections to councils doing it full time, but I always want the option of people to be able to do it part time.
Talking about options, we had another tweet to say that, like everything else, councils have to move on, but the tweet said, will you bring council meetings into the 21st century by ending rules requiring council agendas to be sent to councillors in hard copy? Apparently that's something your department does.
Oh, I had no idea such rules existed. If someone would point it out, I would do my best to abolish it. Right,
one success for the day in that case. And what about, can government stop some councillors sitting on two local councils, example, a town council and an upper council as well?
I don't think there's a problem about sitting on a town council and sitting on a principal council. I have received the odd representation about people who sometimes are described as being double-hatted, where they're on the district and the county at the same time. And if they've got the time to do it, well, I still kind of wonder about that. I'm reluctant to take decisions to end twin hatting. I think ultimately the electorate has to make a decision. And again, the great thing about councils is you get people coming in from all different kind of backgrounds, and I want to keep councils a vital and a vibrant place. I don't want them to become like you and I and the rest of us here, just a little stale part of the political machine. I want them fresh and exciting.
Well, on to that appropriate point, John.
Back in December, Michael Heseltine said in The Guardian that making a county council unitary could save them $10 million a year. Shouldn't this policy be pursued?
I mean, I did think about this, and I thought about it long and hard. I know there was this kind of jokey thing that I said I'd have a pearl-handled revolver and shoot the first official. that came in and suggested a restructure. When that actually happened, I didn't, you'd be pleased to know. But my view was that, given the financial restraints we were under, that we could potentially waste an awful lot of money on a reorganisation, and that we'd essentially take a couple of years out, and I don't think we could afford to do so. Also, I have very strong views about how you get change in an organisation. And the traditional view among local government, among the political classes, is you do restructure and then everything fits into that. My view is that it should be exactly the opposite, pretty much as it is in business, pretty much as it is in the world of politics, which is that you change the reality and let structure catch up. Now, I think the big push is for joint working. This isn't just to save money, this is to deliver something much more sensible. And I do foresee a time, not in the immediate future, but where structure will catch up with the new reality of joint chief executives, joint working together. But I don't want to lose the immediacy that councillors have. I don't want that where you start having to look after a patch that is so big that you lose that. I like the idea of a councillor being able to look after an area.
Okay. How does localism align with the DCLG diktat to local authorities to lower council tax and enforce weekly waste collections?
Well, I've not enforced weekly collections. I mean, I have been gabby. I have been a tad annoying. I had a councillor accosting me in the streets in Victoria on my way back from Boots the Chemist, and said, "Why are you always going on about weekly collections? We've just got our electorate trained to accept fortnightly collections." Well, I said to him, you know, the part of democracy, I thought we were the people's servants, and I didn't think it was part of our process to train people. But I have been gabby, but I haven't forced weekly collections. I mean, I've created a condition whereby the public can start to exercise their rights, and where politicians might feel a little hot under the collar, having to explain why it's going to be fortnightly, or in the case of some authorities in Wales moving over to, I think, a 21-day collection cycle.
Do you enjoy local government bashing? Please stop, it's demoralising.
I love local government bashing because I love local government. And I think local government is one of the most adaptable, smarter parts of our constitution. I think it manages crisis better than practically anywhere. And I think, just take the floods. I think, I can think of one council that did spectacularly badly, but most of them cancelled Christmas. And it was kind of interesting, if you looked on Sky or the BBC, that the council was there, but more particularly, so were the councillors. It was the councillors that were going out into their ward, helping fill the sandbags, helping reassure people. And that's the difference, I think, between councils and health authorities and the like. It's that wonderful immediacy. So when I do a bit of bashing, it's in the confines of a very deep and loving relationship.
Okay, jump you.
The question is not a surprising one, but is asked by a whole range of different people, and you can probably guess which region they come from, which is to ask, why are modern northern urban areas suffering much bigger cuts, allegedly more than 5 times per head, than those in parts of the south?
Well, I think this is question, let's just have a look. This is question number 5 from Unite.
It was asked by a large number of people.
Yes, it was. I'm sure.
I'm sure Unite are a large number of people.
As we started out this process, the 10 most prosperous places in the country received the smallest grant. And that's still the case. The 10 most deprived areas of the country receive the largest grant, and that remains the same. The
question is not about the grants, it's about the cuts.
But the size are proportionate, and of course, as you will be aware, Dr. Pugh, I did introduce banded floors, so that those that were more dependent on grant had a lower cut. But if, say, you're looking at some of the larger northern cities that receive well above the national average in terms of spending power, it is not surprising that that's where the reductions come from. It's a quarter of public spending.
So you're arguing that they're proportionally the same?
Proportionally, no, I'm not arguing that.
You're not arguing that?
No, I'm arguing that actually proportionately the more prosperous areas took a larger cut because of the banded floors that I put in right from the very beginning. And this year, no authority will lose more than 6.9%, which is an improvement on previous years. And I have to say that I think, given that local government is a quarter of public expenditure, I have to say how immensely impressed I am with the way in which they've handled it. And I was particularly pleased to see the result of the BBC poll that said that the majority of people had not noticed the difference in the reductions, and in fact thought there'd been an improvement in service.
Okay, we're very, very interested to see this information that the cut is proportional across all local authorities. Very grateful to receive that information if you got it. Moving on, why does the government fund rural councils, this is from Alex Fuchs, by up to £100 per head less than urban councils when the services cost the same?
Well, many of us around the table will recall the late Sandy Bruce Lockhart, and you may recall in the early 1980s I did some work with Sandy in which we looked at the effect of deprivation in urban areas and the effect in rural areas, and we compared the Kent villages with Camden and Islington. And if you were poor in Camden and Islington, because there was kind of like a critical mass, that poverty was recognised. In the rural areas, it wasn't. So last year we introduced a sum for sparsity relating to poverty, and this year we've introduced, and we put that in the base, and this year we've produced some in order to do the same thing in terms by way of a reward grant, because I do think it's kind of unfinished business, and I personally feel, kind of a debt to Sandy that I want to address. But I think we have to be really clear the level of difficulty that, say, my old stomping ground of Bradford or Manchester has is a little different from some of the rural villages in Suffolk. So there is a degree there, but we are moving over to a reward system. So the more that you do, the more in which you can keep.
Okay, following on from that, the next question comes from Rob Whiteman, who's Chief Executive of SIPFA, an organisation I think known to us all. And he's saying, would you support an independent commission to local government funding to ensure the fairer distribution of funds? And rather than people argue about it, you'd have an independent commission and tell you just what's going on.
I mean, I'd look at the Australian system, in which they have a grants commission. And there is things that in a previous life I found attractive to it, but I'm not entirely sure the Treasury would find it particularly attractive. And ultimately, if you look in terms of where the Australian Grant Commission comes down to, you would have a decision with regard to the totality. And in this system, we've introduced something that's very similar to Australia in terms of the way in which changes in activity are kept, are rewarded. Half the business rates are now retained locally, and hopefully as the years progress we'll be able to increase that amount.
Thank you. David?
If you've done an analysis of the tweets that come in, and I think you suggested that earlier, you'll have spotted that a substantial number of the questions were about the impact of funding reductions. On various, the impact of funding reductions on various particular services, children's centres, Sure Start, youth services, homelessness, care services, those sorts of things. And the question I'm going to put is just an example really from those many that came in. One, for example, would be how will you help the 150 women domestic abuse victims who are being turned away from refuges every day due to budget cuts. I guess 150 refers to the area that this question comes from, but it's got to be a situation that's fairly typical across the country, I guess.
Well, I think local authorities have an obligation to protect the most vulnerable. I think the local authorities have an obligation to ensure that there's no duplication, that they're working together, that they're not paying too much for the chief executive, that they're not keeping too much in reserves, that they're taking care of ensuring that fraud is investigated, they collect the council tax. I mean, local authorities want to have a high degree of autonomy. They have a high degree of autonomy. But sometimes local choices, that people make bad choices. I have to say, as an ex-council leader, there's no way I'd cut women's hostels. There's no way I would do that. I took a large sum out of my council years and years ago, but I protected teachers, I protected schools, I protected social work, I protected the vulnerable. And sometimes I do feel, I hope you'll forgive me for saying that, sometimes I do think there are some authorities that take almost a perverse pleasure in saying, nothing to do with me, it's that Pickles fella. He's taken all this money away. And I actually think that local authorities have done very well, have managed to take this reduction. And after all, it would be disingenuous to suggest that were another political party making those decisions, that the level of reduction wouldn't have been similar.
I think any amount of reducing chief executives' pay, attacking council financial reserves, improving collection rates is not going to address the scale of cuts in many, particularly northern authorities. 30-40% across the board cuts could not be dealt with if through those the sorts of examples that you give. Another question that's come in is actually...
I don't accept that. I do not accept that. I think joint working, joint procurement, smarter way of doing things can achieve an awful lot. And I think it is impossible to hold the view we just had when council balances are going up, not down.
But not just a northern problem. This question is fairly obvious where this comes from. What will you do for Oxfordshire children who face losing 38 of their 44 children's centres? Is Oxford a profligate authority?
Well, this is an example of democracy. People have consulted, and as you will have seen from your papers, now it looks like Oxfordshire are not going to cut a single children's centre. They've listened to what the public said, and they're looking for other ways. So I think we should be very happy, and we should congratulate Oxfordshire for listening to their public and being adaptable to their public.
One more, an example which I guess you're going to give the same answer to. Where do the homelessness go? Where do the homeless go when councils slash supporting people from them?
Well, we of course, in terms of homelessness, I think the level of homelessness is now as low as it has been in 27 of the last 30 years. And indeed, we're specifically offering help to local authorities to deal with homelessness. We're specifically helping local authorities to ensure that people are not kept in bed and breakfast. We're specifically helping local authorities in capital to deal with poor landlords. We're specifically helping local authorities to ensure that people who've been sleeping rough. I mean, we are looking from a position where, in terms of homelessness and rough sleeping, at least now we're actually counting rough sleepers, unlike the last government that they ignored them, that we are looking at a position that's helpful, because I don't believe local authorities, a sensible, caring, compassionate local authority, would slash services to the vulnerable.
Sam.
Thanks, Chairman. 3 quick questions, Secretary of State. The first one, councils like Birmingham have billions of pounds worth of assets yet plead poverty. Should they sell up and invest more in people?
Well, we did quite a bit to help them in terms of capital, use of capital resources last time, because I do recognise they've got a biggish problem with regard to equal pay. I mean, you're right, or rather the questioner is right. Birmingham is sat on they're very asset rich, and I think providing they can ensure that the service that's available to the public is there. They've got many fine assets. I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be sensible to release that. The size of the problem they've got with equal pay is just so daunting. I don't think they've got an alternative to do so. And I think Birmingham will come stronger from the process. Though we did go out of our way. I mean, virtually half the amount that was available on capital, we pushed over to Birmingham last year with the help of the Treasury, because clearly we didn't want them to be in such a difficult position. It takes a while to sell things.
Number 2, what will you do to assist local SMEs and co-ops to bid for council contracts against large outsourcing companies? Quite interesting.
About 45% of contracts now go to SMEs. I think there are a number of things we can do. First one is we've got to be really sensible about pre-qualification questionnaires, which frankly have got out of hand. With the help of the LGA, we went to a position whereby once the EU contracting procurement rules come in, that we didn't. There wasn't. I don't think there's a need for qualifications and questionnaires before that. We do that. It makes it a lot easier, and many councils around Europe are able to offer contracts to local firms, and I think it's a good way of putting things into the system without things below sort of €200,000. Isn't exactly going to cause strange shifts in the market.
Okay. And my third and final favourite question is paying minor celebrities to switch on Christmas lights a good use of council funds rather than spending it on services?
Well, my view, it's a perfect example of the redistribution. It's taking money from the stupid and the gullible and giving it to the undeserving. Frankly, I have to say, both myself and Mr. Betts are available at any time during the Christmas festival to turn and I will even throw in.
Not sure I'll be received in
Sure, I can undercut you on any occasion.
I'm very cheap.
Mark.
I've got a number of tweets on the planning system, and the first one I think we can pretty much anticipate your response to, but is, do you regret revoking regional spatial strategies?
No, not for a second do I regret getting rid of them. I thought they were it took a long time to get rid of them. I think it's a much better position for local people to decide. Now, I think there was a kind of a almost willful misunderstanding that thought people would have a veto, but I think people have to take, if you give people power, they have to exercise it responsibly, and they have to take a view with regard to the future needs. And I think we're in a pretty good place. There weren't that many adopted plans when we came in, and now I think by Easter we should have a rising 80% or so published, and over 60-ish adopted.
And on that point, we've got a tweet from a body, I think, looking to defend the greenbelt, asking whether you'll allow councils a period of grace while their plans are examined.
Well, I mean, the effect on the greenbelt has been negligible. The amount, even on greenfield sites, has been pretty small. I saw figures, I think I quoted them on the floor of the House, that in the last quarter of a century, the last figures, I think it was 2011, 2012, in terms of building on the greenbelt, it was at a lowest pretty level. Now, we are looking in terms of the weighting you have to give, but I think it's kind of important that it's a realistic possibility. I have seen some submitted plans that do put all eggs in a barely constructed basket in terms of extra. So I think there's got to be a chance that these houses will crystallise.
This is the particular concerns of some authorities, the areas where it's taking a long time because so many local authorities have prepared their local plans that there are a lot waiting to be approved by the planning inspector. Yeah. Can you give some weight to those?
The more advanced and the more realistic, the more robust the evidence is, with regard to housing numbers and the ability of those housing numbers actually to appear, then the greater emphasis that we'll have. We've had informal discussions with the inspectorate who are going about it in a proper way, but I do not anticipate many rejections in those that are currently submitted.
Right. And another one from a body seeking to protect the countryside, asking why shouldn't we make developers build the homes that they've already got permission for before they're allowed to apply to build elsewhere?
Well, this is a matter of controversy, but what we do know is that in recent months, the amount of land banking that developers have, the important thing to look at is the percentage that lies dormant. And the percentage like dormant is dropping like a stone. I saw a report from Savills that suggested that land banks were being used faster than at any time since 2007.
Have you got a view about the use it or lose it principle on planning consents?
I think that kind of misunderstands how the system works. As the desire to build, as orders start, then the nature of land banking is going to increase because you start to move at a faster pace. That's why I believe that the percentage of that lies dormant, that's not being used, is the critical one. And that critical figure under analysis, not by myself, but by Savills, suggests that the amount that's lying dormant is dropping like a stone.
Thank you. Chris.
Secretary of State, you will be aware that we've had quite a few questions in relation to house building and housing markets, which is probably not surprising given that you're only spending 1.1 billion on affordable homes and 24 billion on housing benefit. Now, first of these questions, perhaps if I could ask two of the tweets together. The first one says, we aren't building enough. Labour's new towns idea accepts the housing crisis in a grown-up way. Have you anything so radical? And also, housing prices up 0.5%, supply down 0.6%, demand up 10.2%. Is a housing crisis becoming a disaster?
Well, remember when we arrived in office, as I was describing on the floor, the spirit of Stanley Baldwin was greeting me with the historic low levels of building. We inherited a position where it was low in the 1920s, and we needed to start that process off. I think I kind of understand that Labour and the perfectly entitled want to go back to a spatial strategy. This is where the new towns are going to be, and take it and lump it, here they go. I have to say, if we look in terms of what was delivered, we had a plan for 5 new Garden City eco-towns. That wasn't delivered, so in true Khrushchev style, they were extended to 10, and still none were delivered. It will take a very long time to be able to build a garden city. There are a number of authorities who are keen to do so, and we saw an example on the floor of the House on Monday during questions that we're willing. What I do think we can do is I do think we can get some garden settlements going. There are, because of the nature of the retrenchment, changes in our need for armed services. Ministry of Defence have got a lot of land which has a potential for development. We've got a lot of stalled sites. We've managed to get 69,000 units outgoing, and I think we're perfectly capable of getting 100 units out of what we know is available currently. And I think we have a better chance of getting these settlements going before the very long, and by the nature of the thing, unless we're going to confiscate land, process of getting garden cities going.
So are you saying then that the housing crisis will not become a disaster, or isn't becoming a disaster?
Well, I think it was a disaster, and I think
so it's already a disaster.
It was a disaster when we arrived. We were greeted with the burned-out wreck of a policy, and since which time it's been bumping along the ground, and we've been trying to get it going. One of the things that we will be able to do, we will be producing more social housing than the last Labour government managed in 13 years. And I think with the help of things like Help to Buy and the various other initiatives, we are beginning to see some life come back into building outside social housing.
Well, you're struggling to achieve that when you've cut the social housing grant by 60% and you're only spending 1.1 billion a year. But if we can move on to affordable housing, but let's just move on to the next. Let's move on to the next question. Let's move on to the next question, Secretary.
We're building more council houses than you have managed.
Housing ministers.
Just say, I think you've made a comment. Secretary's got a right
I think
make a statement. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm used to him shouting. I mean, he's a very nice man outside. I mean, he can be very aggressive in these circumstances. We have built more council houses in this administration than in the whole of the 13 years. We will deliver 170,000 social houses. I think that is pretty impressive.
But you are only spending 1.1 billion on the affordable housing program. You've only spent, you've cut the social housing by 60%. But let's move on to the next question.
All that says how ineffectual you are. You had all this money, you didn't build anything.
Let's have the next question.
Housing ministers come and go. When will the coalition government take housing seriously and address housing needs of older people?
Well, it's a bit rich, really, because I barely got round to naming the last housing ministers under Labour. They're only there for... The average length of a housing minister was 9 months and 4 days. With Grant Shapps, you had someone that was there for 2 years.
Well, I think the question is, though,
potentially has the
but the question is, we can make the arguments about the previous government, but the question is not from me. This is from a member of the public who's saying housing ministers come and go. When will this coalition government, which you're responsible for, take housing seriously and address housing needs of older people? I don't think it's helpful to talk about the previous government. They're asking what you will do.
Well, I've just told you we're going to build 170,000. And despite having less resources than the previous government wasted, we will be delivering 170. We are ensuring through the Help to Buy process that first-time buyers are back on the scene. We are ensuring that mortgages are available. We are seeing a time where housing, for the first time in a long time, the number is starting to creep up, as the Prime Minister pointed out at question time today. An increase in starts of 89% is pretty damn impressive. Mary.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary of State, this question is specifically from a resident who was involved in the dispute over the demolition of houses in the housing market renewal area of Anfield and Liverpool. And she asked, why do you listen to Save and not to the local residents of the Welsh streets who voted unanimously for demolition? And I think she's asking if you would come and see them.
Well, I did actually have a look at the Mayor of Liverpool was kind enough to give me a talk around the area. I know he feels passionately about demolition. I have my doubts. I haven't made a final decision yet. I'm still very carefully considering. But I think there was a legitimate worry and concern about the use of demolishing pretty sturdy and substantial houses. I found it pretty depressing going around with Joe, looking at these houses that had these sort of iron protectors over the doors because there are now double owners living in them. And the thing that's kind of worrying that's in our mind is that under Labour, we lost 420,000 affordable houses through the process of demolition. Now, given what's happening with Liverpool, given the city deal, given the prospects, it's clearly going to be a place people are going to want to live. It's a place on the up. I think it's not unreasonable, before we take the decision to demolish these houses, just to say, well, just hold on, is this all right? Because the last government was criticised for demolition. We said we would end demolition. Our coalition partner said we'd end demolition, and I think it's not unreasonable just to have a look at this in the round before we make the final decision.
But you bear in mind the plea of the...
I want to be fair-minded about the whole process. I'm not being sort of doctrinal about it. I've just been a bit cautious, that's all.
So if the code for sustainable homes is withdrawn, how can local authorities consistently ask for sustainable materials outside of building regulations?
I missed the first part.
If the code for sustainable homes is withdrawn, how can local authorities consistently ask for sustainable materials outside building regulations?
We're currently looking at the code, and we're currently looking at building regulations, and we're looking towards a more simplified system. As you know, Lord Taylor has been doing a lot of work. I don't think this necessarily affects sustainability or affects energy efficiency. I think it does. What it tries to do is to get a consistent code. So I think the worries expressed there, I doubt will come about.
And the last one I'll ask is, will you provide longer-term empty property rate relief for landlords upgrading energy efficiency?
I'll have to take that on advisement. I wasn't aware that was an enormous problem in terms of getting things back into place. We have been looking at the effect it's had on holiday lets and had some discussions with the Commission on that. But if that's a big problem, let's just that's not something I'm terribly aware of.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can probably come back to the Secretary on that one. That would be helpful. Just finally on the Ask Pickles tweets, we had a tweet in which said, "For the record, how much did your government spend on biscuits in the last financial year?"
Oh, cool! I can't believe this.
And Secretary of State, I'm going to have to add my little bit on top. You know, is the bill for salads now larger than the bill for biscuits?
The bill for what?
Is the bill for salads now larger than the bill for biscuits?
Well, my dear chums, obviously, because I'm a big fat guy, we take these views. The sum related to the amount of hospitality we offer, and we offer hospitality for people coming outside government who've got more than a 4-hour travel. But the sum that is available is 17% of the sum that the last Labour government spent on hospitality. I don't think it's unreasonable to offer people a warm beverage and something to eat if they've travelled more, if the thing's going to last for more than 4 hours. But with regard to whether or not any minister has consumed any of this, I can tell you on pain of death, none of them have. We don't do that kind of thing.